I was interested, I guess, because the top four teams all won. A few of them were challenged, but they won. I was really interested to see what happened with Miami and Wisconsin, just because they're still unbeaten. Last week they had 6 one-loss teams ahead of them. Ohio State obviously lost. Penn State lost, so they went ahead of them. And I wanted to see if Miami would be ahead of Wisconsin or Wisconsin would be ahead of Miami. That was really where just because I think if these teams continue to win, I think everybody is very intrigued to see, hey, does Wisconsin truly control its own destiny? If they win out and they win the Big Ten championship, are they just a lock? I don't think that's necessarily true at this point. And, Miami, I think it's a different story. Miami still has Notre Dame to play. If they continue to win and they're undefeated, imagine a Miami-Clemson ACC championship game. I mean, the winner of that game you would think would be in a really good spot. So that was the thing that I was interested in, just because I thought Miami and Wisconsin arguably came off their best performances of the year, and I just wondered if they might be able to get ahead of some of those other one-loss teams like TCU.
I want to get back to that ACC title game in a minute, but back to Wisconsin for a moment. How much were they helped by the fact that Northwestern now jumped into the rankings and they beat Northwestern, and the fact that Iowa is in the rankings and they play Iowa this week? So how much – because I was with you. I still think an undefeated Wisconsin team, it could be interesting. They may not get in, but how much were they helped by those couple of things?
It helps. I mean, think about not just the numbers, but think about how good Iowa looked this past weekend, and now, fortunately for Wisconsin, they get them this weekend. I mean, that beyond rankings. I mean, Iowa put it on Ohio State. I mean, 55-24, and everybody's looking at that Iowa team, and some people don't seem to want to ever give Iowa respect. I live in SEC country, and people kind of giggle at Iowa, and I don't. Iowa lost on the last play of the game to Penn State. They went to Michigan State the next week and lost in a one-possession game. Greeny knows a couple weeks later they lost to Northwestern again in a very low-scoring one-possession game. And
overtime.
Pat Fitzgerald, his team, a great game, and that's their losses this year. And then they blew Ohio State out, and now they're going to go to Madison. So, I think perception-wise, which is something that's been hurting Wisconsin, I think the rankings, the way they shook out last night, definitely helped them. And now these next 2 weeks, think about what they have. Iowa, they've got Michigan, who probably will be ranked by next week. And then they've got a Big Ten championship game. So, I'm not slighting Wisconsin at all. I just get aggravated when people say, hey, if they're an unbeaten in a Power 5, slam dunk, they're automatically in. That just feels like everybody gets a trophy to me kind of thought. If they're deserving and you think they're a top 4 team, absolutely put them in there. But I get frustrated because somebody says, hey, they're a Power 5, they're undefeated, they have to be in. That's more that Baylor thought, school thought, and I'm just not a fan of that. But if they get through this grind that they have coming up in these next 4 weeks, they should get a real look at being up in the top 4.
So the fun of this, Herbie, we know is the hypothetical. So we've been talking a lot about if Georgia and Alabama are both undefeated in the SEC title game, and it's a instant classic one-pointer field goal game, would the loser still get in? So we've talked about that. Let me throw this one at you as well. What if Miami beats Notre Dame this week in a pretty convincing way? Or they beat them. They're going to jump up in the rankings. Maybe they'll be in the top 4. Maybe they'll jump the Oklahoma-TCU winner. We'll have to wait and see. What happens if they then get to an ACC championship game undefeated against Clemson, and Clemson beats Miami to give them their only loss of the season in a instant classic one-point game? Is there any way you could see both of those teams from the ACC actually getting into the Final Four?
Chris Felica and I have talked about that possibility once Miami beat Virginia Tech. In fact, we started talking about that in the car after the game. It's funny how because Georgia and Bama are already at 1-2 and they've been up there these first couple weeks, it's a little bit a little bit easier to consider those two teams getting out and talking about what if it's a close game in Atlanta, would they be able to stay in the top four versus Miami, who's been climbing and trying to get up into consideration. But if Miami beats Notre Dame and they're able to finish out the rest of their regular season, which you would think with, I think, Virginia and Pitt, that they would be in good shape, and then get ready to play Clemson, at that point, you would think that they would probably be either in the top four or right on the fringe of being up in the top four. I said last night that with all the injuries that have mounted with Alabama, I think that Clemson, when the dust settles at the end of the year, I think they're the best football team out there. If their quarterback Kelly Bryant's healthy, I think they're the best team, most complete team for sure. And if they're up there in the top two or three, it would definitely be. If we're going to talk about Georgia and Alabama as a possibility, then I think you should have the same type of conversation hypothetically about Clemson and Miami. If Miami wins out and they're undefeated, and Clemson's sitting there, they meet in the championship, and Miami were to win a really, really close game, and all these teams have one loss. Yeah, I mean, we would definitely be able to consider, or if Clemson were to win a close game and all these teams have one loss, we would have to consider that. With all that being said, Mike, I still think I wouldn't be shocked if Georgia lost Saturday at Auburn. We've talked so much about the possibility of Georgia and Bama. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think we're going to have two from one conference. I just want to say that now. We talk so much about hypothetical. It's almost like I feel like we think this is going to happen. I think Georgia loses Saturday. I think there's a very good possibility that Auburn could make them have to throw when it's expected that they're throwing on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8 on the road in a true SEC environment at Jordan-Hare. And that's the one thing we've not seen yet from Jake Fromm. You know, if they can't run the ball and dictate when they pass, are they going to be able to get through Auburn? I think is something that a lot of us want to see. And but as I said, I don't think we'll have two from one conference by the time this thing's all done.
Tell you what, if Auburn wins that game, they play themselves right into the conversation with a game at home against Alabama looming towards the end. Herbie with us, brought to you by Allstate. Make sure you check out the Herbstreit and Fitzsimmons podcast. This week, the guest is Miami head coach Mark Richt as they get set to welcome Notre Dame in the game of the weekend this Saturday. We'll get to that in a second. I want to ask you, though, about Oklahoma State, because that game, I mean, it took like 6 hours to play because there's all these touchdowns and everything else. And certainly it did wonders for Baker Mayfield's Heisman candidacy. It vaulted him to the top of the Heisman race, and probably justifiably so. But if you're one of the people in that committee, Herbie, what would that game have done for your perception of the winner, considering that, yeah, the offense was unbelievable, but the defenses both looked so terrible? How would that have impacted your perception of those teams?
Yeah, I'm not just personally a huge fan of these games that, you know, are these 50 to 48 type of games. And history has shown us in the modern era of college football that defense still matters. Defense typically, you go back and look at the 3 years of the playoff, almost every year, with the exception of Oklahoma, the year they got in and played Clemson, you could look at scoring defense, and you would find that all of the teams that got into the playoff are up in the top 10, top 15, and really that part of their team is a strength. I thought Oklahoma had a chance to have a really strong defense this year with the way they played early in the year, and it's turned out, and they're very quick to defend. Hey, the Big 12 is different than every other league, and I agree with that. The Big 12 offenses are very, very talented, most of them, and the quarterback play, the receivers, the scheme itself, it's tough to defend. I get that. But when you watch it, it almost looks like the 7-on-7 of the summer has creeped into the fall with guys wearing pads. It looks like 7-on-7. And so it's a combination of, I don't think they have the personnel defensively that maybe some of the other leagues have. And I also think they're trying to defend quarterbacks and schemes that most teams don't have to defend. So I'd keep that in mind if I were on the committee. And I would look at it and say, Right now, Oklahoma, because of Baker Mayfield, he's kind of an X factor, whether it looks pretty or not. It's almost like you look at a team that wins 10-7 and frown upon that because they can't score. Or do we look at that and say, boy, that defense is tough. Boy, they're physical. I mean, it just depends on they're winning. And Baker Mayfield, if it's a competitive game, he's going to win. I mean, it's that simple. And now I might be proven wrong Saturday. They play TCU. But look at their games this year with the exception of Iowa State. The Ohio State game was 13-10. Ohio State's lead with 2 minutes to go before it got out of control in the fourth quarter. And he made a few plays to turn that one around. Baylor, same thing. They got challenged. Number 6 makes big plays in that game. The Texas game, the Kansas State game, this past weekend. When the chips are on the table, he's the one guy in the country that delivers every single time. And so I'd almost give them the benefit of the doubt because of how often he comes through for them. But in general, I'm just not a fan of offenses having to outscore the other offense. I equate it to college basketball. I said last night, it's like it's Loyola Marymount. You know, they hit the three, they score 112 points a game, and all of a sudden they get in the tournament and they get cold. All of a sudden they can't hit those threes, and they don't have the half-court offense to work the ball around and score. And now all of a sudden they're going to get knocked out of the tournament. That's what teams that have to score 48 a game remind me of. At some point, it's that three's not hitting, and what do you have to fall back on? And that's usually where a team like that ends up getting beat.
And then you guys, obviously, in Miami, for Miami Notre Dame, 3 versus 7. There are 7 ranked matchups this Saturday. This one could highlight them all. I thought the same thing. You mentioned that about Fromm, the Georgia quarterback, if they have to throw themselves into a game. I thought that about Notre Dame and Brendan Winbush, the quarterback who runs well. You see him throw well at times, but struggle throwing at times as well. That had been my concern, Herbie. If he has to throw them back into a game, that really hasn't been a test just yet for them. So just an initial kind of looking at this game, is that one of the issues you see as well, or what else?
That's good. Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, you know from following that team that they've been able to overpower people up front, especially that left side. I've looked at a lot of film this week. The left side of that offensive line, they are incredible. And both the left guard and left tackles will be making a lot of money in the NFL very soon. But they've been very fortunate with Josh Adams in the running game and Brandon Wimbush creating on third down scrambles. That's to me the game within the game is watching the Miami defensive front 7 against the Notre Dame running game and the physicality. If you're right, if Wimbush is back there throwing when Miami knows, and they play a ton of man, and Manny Diaz believes in stunts and twists and blitzes, and it makes it tough on an offensive line. Wimbush creating, not necessarily throwing. If they're going to win, he's going to have to make some throws. But him creating on third down, how does Miami defend that? When they play a ton of man with their backs to the quarterback, they're going to have to spy. And when they spy, can that guy make plays to prevent him from scrambling around and making plays? But if he has to throw throughout the game on third down, because Miami is one of the best third down defenses in the nation, that'll be something that'll tell us a lot about who ends up winning this game. And should be we've been talking about it all week and watching every time I turn on ESPN, there's that 30 for 30. And I mean, it feels really good to see Notre Dame sitting at 8-1 in the top 3. Here comes Miami with Mark Richt building this program back up. And I was there last week. The stadium was alive. And their fans are buying in and believing. And the future is incredibly bright for Miami with Mark Richt, no matter what happens Saturday. But this feels good to see 2 teams like this coming back to kind of relive the glory days of what it used to be. So it'll be a lot of fun. It's going to be hyped. And the atmosphere at Miami, when it's a big game, just feels different than anywhere else you go. And that magic was back last Saturday against Virginia Tech. I can only imagine what Notre Dame is going to be walking into in that stadium on Saturday night.
It's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and we have everything in the world riding on it. We got to